My fellow Nigerians, as your future president, I want to comment today on Bola Tinubu's 2 day state visit to France exactly 1 month ago today. I deliberately didn't react immediately in order to, for the benefit of doubt, leave a month to see whether there will be any kind of movement or action in terms of the agreements Tinubu signed with President Emmanuel Macron of France. Sadly, it is quite clear now that while the trip served the strategic interest of France in terms of their relevance in Africa, at a time when they have deservingly lost significant influence in many of their former African and especially West African colonies, it absolutely doesn't serve Nigeria's strategic interests. You see, there's a reason why no Nigerian president went on a state visit to France between 2000 and now. Tinubu's romance with France is based on his personal, business, or seemingly medical interests than actually safeguarding Nigeria's strategic interests. Before this state visit, and since taking office over a year and a half ago, Tinubu had gone to France on what was either a private visit or a work stay more times than to any other country. Granted, Tinubu's first France trip in June 2023, that's after taking office, was for the Paris summit for the new Global Financial Pact, a platform intending to help vulnerable countries like Nigeria better deal with the after effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, among other issues. But in September 2023, after his participation at the United Nations General Assembly, Tinubu flew to France and spent 5 days there. And this year, 2024, minus the state visit, Tinubu has visited France 3 times. Between January 24 and February 7, he spent 2 weeks on a private visit in France. On August 19, he again departed for France on a 4 day work stay, whatever that means. In addition, on October 11, after spending a week in the UK as part of his annual leave, Tinubu flew to Paris, France for what was termed an important engagement. He returned to Abuja from France on October 19, meaning after 1 week. Now, if Tinubu's several private visits to France are for undisclosed medical reasons, that will actually be odd because one of his biggest claims to the presidency was that he built Lagos State into some sort of a first rate destination. If even that Lagos isn't good enough for his medical care, it's either that claim is fraudulent or he's just not patriotic. But if the visits are for some other selfish private engagements or dealings, then that's certainly more concerning. And yes, this absolutely matters because France is fast losing whatever is left of their influence or relevance in most, if not all, of their former African colonies. And that's why Macron has been desperately courting non former French colonies like Nigeria, South Africa, and Ethiopia. And unsurprisingly, one of France's top newspapers, Le Monde, in a November 28 article about that state visit, said, and I quote, Bola Tinubu is a key partner in France's efforts to shift its diplomacy towards Africa's English-speaking countries and put its setbacks in the Sahel behind it. End of quote. You see, they are not even hiding it anymore. The French establishment, through Le Monde in this case, is making it quite clear that because French-speaking West Africa is now finally opposed to them, and because that will absolutely affect France's access to their raw materials, for example, instead of mending ties with those countries, France is now turning to its to English-speaking countries to be its next victims. And that's why I totally condemn Bola Tinubu's engagement with France. We cannot and should not be pawns in France's diplomatic chess game, period. Bola Tinubu shouldn't place his business or medical tourism interests or any other personal interest for that matter above our country's diplomatic interests. Indeed, Section 130, subsection 2 of the Nigerian Constitution is abundantly clear that the powers of the presidency shouldn't be used for personal gain. Indeed, fellow Nigerians, of what good will it be to us? How does it serve our national interests to have troubled relations with our French-speaking neighbors whose continued support and cooperation we badly need to sustain the fight against terrorism and cross-border banditry because Tinubu has chosen, in this case, to be France's puppet in the region? We've already seen how Tinubu's misguided pro-France policies led Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger to leave ECOWAS and effectively create the rival alliance of Sahel states. The fact is, we Nigeria have on the whole produced more incompetent and corrupt leaders, certainly than most or all of the French speaking countries in West Africa. And that's definitely a proposition France finds very appealing. Because you see, France has always thrived on manipulating the political class, especially in Africa. And yet, while those countries have or are moving away from France because of the negative impact France has had on them, Tinubu is taking us in the opposite direction. France is very well aware of the negative impact it has had on its former French colonies, and that's why President Macron has sought a so called renewal between France and Africa since he took office in 2017. But of course, as everyone knows, the status quo has remained. Not only has France not changed its bad ways, in some cases, it has actually doubled down on them. The popular English idiom, a leopard cannot change his spots, comes to mind. The Bible in Jeremiah 13:23 puts it succinctly. Can a leopard change its spots? Neither can you do good who are accustomed to doing evil. In fact, it is precisely because France hasn't changed its ways that Niger Republic's military leader, General Abdourahamane Tchiani, on Christmas Day alleged that France is providing financial aid to Nigeria to set up a French military base in Borno State under the pretext of fighting terrorism, but to actually destabilize Niger Republic and its anti-French neighbors. Of course, if true, that would be terrible for Nigeria's reputation and influence, not just in West Africa, but in Africa as a whole. So it is unsurprising that the very next day, December 26, the federal government, through Information Minister Mohamed Idris, denied the allegation. Likewise, the Chief of Defense Staff, General Christopher Musa, in an attempt to reassure Nigerians, stated that that Nigeria won't allow any foreign military base in our country. Beyond this, though, Tinubu's dispute with Niger clearly shows that he is missing a great opportunity to stand with our neighbors in their efforts to rid themselves of France's negative influence. That is absolutely bad diplomacy. Great powers, including regional powers and emerging powers, always influence what happens in their neighborhood for peace and stability. China's principle of neighborhood diplomacy is about friendships with its neighbors and respecting each other's core concerns. America's Monroe Doctrine is about preventing foreign powers from setting up military bases or even military alliances in its neighborhood. Russia invaded Ukraine in part to prevent it from joining NATO, a military alliance that threatens its interests. Brazil, South Africa, and others have similar neighborhood diplomacy arrangements. Bola Tinubu just doesn't get it. He just doesn't understand how this is supposed to work, and that's a big, big shame. Now, before anyone accuses me of just hating France, let me make it quite clear here that I don't hate everything about France. For years now, in fact, I've only bought sneakers from the French brand Le Coq Sportif. Also, the French government is the majority shareholder of Airbus, the aviation giant, which was co-founded by French aeronautical engineer Roger Bataille and which has for decades now provided the world with great commercial airplanes, including my all-time favorite, the A380. Again, I respect France's achievements in fashion and philosophy, and yes, their overall historical record as one of the world's prominent nations. Heck, in two of my 2012 blog posts titled Lessons for Nigeria from France's Elections and the Storming of the Nigerian Bastille, I commended France's democracy and pointed out what we could learn from it. But as we all know, one can both respect France or any other country for that matter for their positives and at the same time be opposed to a misguided deepening of bilateral ties with them due to the baggage and trouble that that brings. We can't talk about France's baggage and trouble in Africa without mentioning the colonial pact which France signed with its former African colonies. That colonial pact remains one of the worst things to have ever happened to Africa. France, didn't intend to grant independence to its African colonies. Their policy of assimilation was designed to absorb those colonies into an imperial setup called, France d'outre-mer, France overseas territories, basically. However, thanks to the anti-colonialism tide of the 1940s and 1950s, France was forced to grant independence to those former colonies. But in order to maintain their enormous economic gains from those territories, France used a carrot and stick approach to get the leaders of those countries to sign the colonial pact with them. Among other things, the colonial pact required all 14 former French colonies in Africa to deposit 50% of their foreign exchange reserves into the French treasury. The negative impact till date that arrangement has had on the former French colonies is very well documented. If Macron was serious about a renewal between France and Africa, he should have absolutely started from there. But of course, he wasn't, and he isn't. Indeed, fellow Nigerians, no one should get carried away by the Tinubu administration's announcement of a €300 million investment plan to support infrastructure, healthcare, agriculture, and human capital development in Nigeria following Tinubu's state visit to France. How many times have we heard announcements of investment plans and even investment deals, particularly from the Tinubu administration, that eventually amounted to little or nothing? France knows how to play puppets like Tinubu very well, give him the attention and state visits that he craves, and use him to get the deals that they need. And that's why it's unsurprising that in the time since that state visit, French energy giant Total Energies has secured a valuable deepwater oil block in Nigeria. Meanwhile, there's yet to be a concrete investment commitment by any French company in the areas mentioned as part of the investment plan. Fellow Nigerians, in essence, what I'm saying is one more compelling reason to vote Bola Tinubu from office in 2027 is his corrupt and questionable dealings with France. Also, France should absolutely not have its damaged ego in Africa massaged and rehabilitated by Nigeria or anyone else for that matter. May God bless you and your families, and may God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria.